At 2:13 a.m., the skies above the Russian town of Toripets lit up like a second sunrise. But this wasn't nature, it was Ukrainian vengeance, flying on carbon fiber wings.
Videos circulating on social media, verified by CNN, show loud detonations and multiple buildings in the depot complex on fire. Governor Igor Rodinya ordered a partial evacuation of the area to get the blazes under control, according to the local government's official Telegram channel post.
In a single strike, a long-range drone, launched from nearly 500 kilometers away, plunged into a Russian Ministry of Defense weapons depot, and everything went up. Everything. Tactical missiles, artillery shells, fuel tanks, aerial bombs, stored in a complex worth over 30 million pounds. And when it blew,
I mean, it's the kind of energy generated which caused NASA to report seeing numerous heat sources from satellite imagery.
NASA reported multiple heat signatures from space. Seismic monitors logged a minor earthquake. A wall of fire roared through the warehouse zone, flattening buildings, igniting secondary explosions, and sending shockwaves echoing into western Russia. Local officials ordered a partial evacuation. The town of Toripets, a place most Russians couldn't point to on a map, emptied overnight because this was no accident. This was methodical, planned, deadly, and when the fires died down, 385 Russian troops were dead. A depot was reduced to ash, and Russia's aggressive war plans crippled before they could even launch. But the real shock? This wasn't even the final message. Ukraine has more targets, and if Western leaders were still hesitating, this fireball was Kiev's answer.
But it also allows it to send a political message, I think, to the West, because these kind of strikes are what Ukraine has wanted to do with Western missiles, but it doesn't have permission to do so yet because of concerns of a Russian escalation.
For 2 years, Ukraine fought with its back against the wall, absorbing blow after blow from Russia's aggressive war machine. But that chapter is closing. But now, the battlefield has shifted. Ukraine isn't just defending anymore. It's taking the fight deep into Russia itself. And the strike on Toripets proves it. This wasn't just another drone strike. This was surgical warfare, designed to cripple Russia before it could unleash its next offensive. Hidden behind layers of camouflage netting and anti-drone jammers, the depot in Toripets had quietly become one of Russia's most strategically loaded staging grounds, serving as a forward operating supply node, a critical artery feeding the Russian war machine in eastern Ukraine. Officially, it was listed as a routine logistics hub, but satellite intel told a different story. Just weeks before the strike, satellite imagery picked up a dramatic surge in activity. Convoys of munitions rolling in under nightfall, fuel tankers and crates of artillery shells lining the perimeter, armored vehicle transports making repeated stops, and mobile command trailers, rarely seen so close to Belarus, began clustering on site. The 2nd Guards Tank Army, one of Moscow's elite armored units, was being refitted for offensive operations.
The source from the Ukraine's security service said that weapons like guided air missiles were stored in the depot.
The goal? To launch a surprise armored thrust from Belgorod through the temporarily occupied Ukrainian region of Luhansk, opening a second axis of attack while Ukrainian forces were pinned down in the south. But this operation depended on one thing: logistics. The fuel, shells, guided missiles, spare parts, all of it was flowing through this single supply node in Toripets. Ukrainian intelligence intercepted chatter. The depot was supplying Russia's 2nd Guards Tank Army, the same unit tasked with opening a new front in Luhansk. And that could only mean one thing. There wasn't just a depot anymore. It had become a launch pad for a deep assault, designed to punch through Ukrainian defenses before Western aid could arrive. It was supposed to catch Ukraine off guard, but Ukraine wasn't caught sleeping. It struck first, and it struck hard. Ukraine didn't just hit a warehouse, it obliterated the backbone of Russia's next offensive before it could even begin.
Overnight, a Ukrainian drone hit a warehouse storing ammunition in Russia, located in the Tver region near the border with Belarus and Latvia, and in close proximity to the Russian capital, Moscow.
The question isn't what Ukraine hit, it's how it managed to hit it. Because Toripets is almost 500 kilometers from the border. That's not just deep inside Russia, that's within reach of Moscow itself.
This is a long-range attack almost 500 kilometers from the border with Ukraine, only a couple of hundred from Moscow itself.
Some reports point to HIMARS. Others whisper it was a Storm Shadow cruise missile. And now, with Ukraine's new F-16S on combat alert, even the skies aren't safe. But whichever system fired the shot, it wasn't working alone, because Toripets wasn't left unguarded. Russia had Buk missile batteries positioned nearby, Pantsir S-1S on overwatch, electronic warfare trucks designed to jam incoming GPS signals, even radar domes scanning the skies for the telltale buzz of Ukrainian drones. On paper, the depot was a fortress, a no-go zone for Ukrainian strikes, and yet, sources inside Defense Intelligence of Ukraine confirm it was a joint operation. Ukrainian drone scouts had been circling the depot for hours, tracking convoys, recording entry points, mapping fuel storage zones. At the same time, NATO ISR satellites locked in from orbit, feeding precise coordinates and electronic signatures. And then, there's the part no one will admit on record: insider sabotage, GPS manipulation, an electronic trap that made Russia's air defenses think the skies were clear until they weren't. By the time the strike package was cleared, the targeting data was flawless. Margin of error, zero. And when the missiles hit, it wasn't just one explosion. It was the opening of hell itself.
I mean, we are talking about plumes of smoke and huge fires and the force to match.
Now Ukraine might have lit the fire, but Russia itself fanned the flames that eventually destroyed its offensive artillery. When the first missile tore open the night sky in Toripets, the nightmare was only beginning, because this particular depot was a powder keg, packed so full of ammunition and fuel that once the fire took hold, nothing could stop it.
Смотри, идет сюда. Офигеть, сейчас. Вот, вы видели эту волну? Просто жесть. А как светло было, вообще как.
The initial blast ripped through the nearest warehouse, igniting the munitions inside. The detonation thundered outward, shaking the ground like an earthquake. Within seconds, a second warehouse went up, and then a third, until the entire compound was engulfed in the firestorm. Fuel convoys along the perimeter erupted in sheets of fire, their tankers bursting like firebombs. Missile crates, stacked in rows, began to cook off, rockets launching skyward uncontrolled, spiraling wildly before crashing into nearby fields. Russian artillery shells detonated inside their storage bays, the shockwaves collapsing walls and throwing debris into the air. The destruction wasn't linear either. It was everywhere at once, flashes tearing open the sky, walls crumbling, and flames leaping hundreds of feet high. From orbit, NASA's satellites recorded the heat as if a small sun had appeared in western Russia. Seismographs logged the tremors as a minor earthquake, and from villages 40 kilometers away, people swore they felt the ground shudder beneath them.
A minor magnitude earthquake was even reported in the surrounding area, which suggests that these warehouses were full.
On the ground, panic consumed the Russian troops. Soldiers poured out of their barracks, stumbling barefoot through broken glass and burning debris. Some tried to salvage equipment, dragging vehicles away from the fire, only to be caught in fresh blasts that hurled them into the dirt. The firestorm raged for hours. Every time rescuers tried to approach, another detonation forced them back. The depot had become a self-sustaining monster, each blast exposing another cache of shells, another truck, another fuel depot waiting to ignite. For the entire night, the sky above Toripets glowed orange, punctuated by the roar of explosions that echoed across the border into Belarus. By dawn, nothing remained. The depot, once a sprawling complex worth £30 million, was gone. In its place stood a crater of twisted steel and scorched earth, a pile of ash where Russia's aggressive war machine had once stood. Months of stockpiling erased in a single night.
And we are talking about a large military facility worth almost £30 million, a series of warehouses which store fuel tanks, artillery shells, ballistic missiles and other types of explosives.
And inside that inferno, hundreds of soldiers had been caught with no chance of escape.
Following this attack, Russian authorities have ordered a partial evacuation in the western town of Toripets.
Videos circulating on social media, verified by CNN, show loud detonations and multiple buildings in the depot complex on fire. Governor Igor Rodinya ordered a partial evacuation of the area.
When the fires finally began to fade, the scale of the destruction came into focus. What had once been a sprawling depot of warehouses, fuel bays, and barracks was reduced to nothing. Nothing stood upright, but the wreckage told only half the story. The real toll was measured in bodies. At first, the Kremlin claimed a minor fire had broken out at a supply facility. Local state TV even ran footage of fire trucks spraying down what they described as a contained blaze. But the truth leaked almost immediately. Telegram channels filled with grainy videos of endless detonations. By the next morning, Russian military propagandists couldn't hide the truth, calling it one of the darkest nights of the war. And then came the numbers. Leaked manifests from regional morgues showed casualty lists so long, some couldn't be confirmed because the bodies were unrecognizable. Entire barracks had been swallowed by the firestorm. Intelligence estimates put the number of dead at 385, not counting the wounded, not counting the missing. Many had been incinerated where they stood.
A Ukrainian drone attack destroyed an ammunition depot in the western Russian region of Tver, a source from Ukraine's security service told CNN.
Among the dead were ordnance officers, engineers, and junior commanders tasked with overseeing the Russia-occupied Luhansk buildup. In other words, not just foot soldiers, but the men responsible for managing Russia's next offensive. For families in western Russia, the news trickled in slowly, through unofficial channels, through phone calls that cut off mid-sentence, through silence when wives asked where their husbands were. There were no medals, no public honors, only mass funerals with coffins sealed shut. For Moscow, the humiliation was just as devastating as the losses. A facility guarded by layered defenses, located just a few hundred kilometers from the capital, had been annihilated overnight. Its defenders never stood a chance. 385 soldiers, gone in seconds. A depot worth 30 million pounds, gone in hours. And with them, the backbone of Russia's next offensive in Luhansk. Ukraine hadn't just destroyed a warehouse, it had erased an entire operation before it could begin.
The drones targeted the Russian Defense Ministry-operated warehouse in Toripets, where tactical missile systems, aerial bombs, and artillery were stored, the security source told CNN.
Ukraine knows it can't strike everywhere at once. Every drone, every missile, every sortie carries enormous value. That's why its offensives are built not on sheer volume, but on precision. Kyiv has learned to be strategic, to pick targets not just for their size, but for their timing, to wait until the blow will have maximum effect, militarily, psychologically, and politically. And that's exactly what happened in Toripets. The strike on Toripets came at a moment heavy with meaning. Days earlier, Russian missiles had slammed into Kharkiv and Zaporizhia, ripping apart apartment blocks, killing civilians in their sleep. The images of mangled buildings and bloodied human beings were still circulating when Ukraine launched its drone across the border. This was a direct payback, a demonstration that Russia's atrocities wouldn't pass unanswered.
We've seen Ukraine ramp up these kind of attacks over the past year, really, with drones it makes domestically, and it's grown in confidence and ambition in doing so.
Within hours of the strike, Ukraine's defense ministry claimed responsibility for the attack. Nothing was being done in hiding, but the timing was even more calculated. The depot was destroyed just one day before Russia's scheduled anniversary offensive in Luhansk, an operation meant to showcase Moscow's momentum on the front. Instead of celebrating, Russian commanders were left scrambling, their launch pad reduced to ash.
The Ukrainian security source told CNN that attacks of this nature are being used methodically to reduce Russia's missile potential.
And back in Moscow, panic set in, with the Luhansk anniversary offensive now crippled before it began. Instead of launching a new front, the Kremlin was forced to explain how a facility so close to Moscow had been obliterated in a single night. For Russia's soldiers, it was demoralizing. For Ukraine's, it was electrifying. The balance of initiative on the Eastern Front had shifted. The symbolism is undeniable for Kyiv. You bring destruction to our civilian cities, and we'll respond by hitting your military targets. You stockpile weapons to attack us. We'll burn them before you can fire a single shot.
What we are seeing in Toripets for Ukraine is simple as far as it's concerned. It helps us defend itself, which is the argument, and it doesn't lead to an escalation.
The strike was intended for more than just crippling Russia's logistics. It was meant to hit at the heart of the Russian army, a warning shot aimed at the Kremlin's confidence, at the troops waiting for orders, at the civilians who had been told the war would never reach them. When the scale of the Toripets strike became undeniable, Moscow reached for its oldest weapon, denial. The Ministry of Defense called it a minor fire. State television showed carefully framed clips of fire trucks dousing small blazes. Not a word about the crater, not a whisper about the hundreds of soldiers missing, but the cover-up collapsed almost instantly. Ukraine itself supplied the footage of the destruction. The Kremlin had boasted for months that Western Russia was secure, shielded by layers of air defenses. Yet a depot, less than 300 kilometers from Moscow, had been annihilated overnight. Blame had to fall somewhere. Reports emerged of local commanders being interrogated by the FSB, accused of negligence or even sabotage. Officers in charge of Toripets defenses were quietly removed. Some accounts claim entire air defense crews were detained for questioning. It wasn't just a defeat, it was a humiliation so severe that the Kremlin turned on its own. And as always, Putin's answer was escalation. Promises of retaliatory missile strikes, vows to punish Ukraine for terrorist attacks.
I think we will see some kind of Russian response. We often do with widespread missile attacks, but this is certainly significant in the grand scheme of things.
But behind the bluster, insiders described an atmosphere of fear. Generals terrified of being the next scapegoat. Commanders questioning whether any rear area depot was truly safe. The message had landed. Ukraine could reach deeper, strike harder, and embarrass Moscow in front of its own people, who have fully backed Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine. For years, the Kremlin promised its citizens the war was distant, a conflict fought far from their towns, their homes, their lives. Toripets shattered that illusion. As the depot burned through the night, local authorities ordered a partial evacuation. Families packed cars in panic, headlights forming long lines on narrow country roads. By the morning, schools were closed, shops shuttered. Life in Toripets stood still under the shadow of a smoldering crater. For ordinary Russians, the war had finally come home, not through propaganda, but through fire and fear. The irony wasn't lost on Ukrainians. For years, they had endured this nightmare, fleeing air raids, watching their homes and neighborhoods being turned into rubble. Now, for the first time, it was Russians. And with Ukraine promising more strikes, the question for Russia's people became unavoidable. If Toripets can burn, what city is next?
Plans for further attacks on similar Russian military facilities are proceeding, according to the source.
Toripets was a turning point. In one night, Ukraine reduced a 30 million pound depot to ash, erased the backbone of Russia's next offensive, and killed 385 soldiers before they ever reached the front. For Moscow, it was humiliation. For Ukraine, it was proof that the war can be carried into Russia's own backyard. And this was only one target. Ukraine's intelligence says more strikes are already planned, more depots, more launch pads, more of the infrastructure Russia thought was untouchable. If a single drone could turn Toripets into a fireball, what happens when Ukraine turns its sights on Crimea or on the command centers directing this war? This wasn't the end of a story. It was the beginning of a new phase. Because if Toripets proved anything, it's this: Ukraine is no longer waiting to defend. It's hunting. The war just crossed a line. The only question is, where will the next fireball erupt?